Welcome to Affinity Designer. In this video I'll be talking about assets, a feature introduced in version 1.5. Assets are design elements which have been stored in a dedicated panel and can be accessed from any open Affinity Designer document. This allows you to copy content across different documents over different sessions. The dedicated panel is called the Assets panel and is hidden by default. To display it, go to the View menu, then to the Studio submenu and select Assets. The Assets panel displays on the left of the Studio by default and comes pre-populated with a variety of assets designed specifically for use with iOS 10 application designs. You can store anything you like in this panel and organise your assets in any way which helps you with your design projects. However, to show you exactly how it works, I'll build up some assets using the web design project you can see on screen. All assets must be stored in a subcategory within an asset category. To create a new category, click on Panel Preferences and select Create New Category. A new category is created with a default name and a subcategory so you can get started quickly. However, let's try and stay organised from the outset and rename the new category by clicking the Panel Preferences again and selecting Rename Category. I'm going to organise my asset categories by client. So I add my client's name, State of the Art. The category name updates and is easy to identify when you wish to select it from the pop-up menu. As I mentioned before, all assets must be stored in a subcategory. That's why one was created with our new category. I'll rename this from the default by clicking on the Subcategories Options menu and selecting Rename. I'll call this Header. Now we can add some content. With the Move tool selected, let's drill down into the header layer and select the inline group, which includes a logo and a nameplate. We can then drag this onto the darker section just under the header subcategory. A single asset is created from the group and is given the same name as you can see from the tooltip, as shown in the Layers panel. If your selection includes separate objects which are not grouped, such as if I select the logo and nameplate separately rather than their group, and then drag them into the Assets panel, each selected object is created as a separate asset. Another way to create an asset is to make your selection and then, from the appropriate subcategories options menu, select Add from Selection. If we hover over this new asset, you'll see it has been given the name Group, which was taken from the Layers panel, but is not particularly handy. So we can Control-click on a Mac or right-click on Windows on the asset and select Rename Asset. Then rename it and click OK. Naming assets is particularly important if you plan to use the search facility on the panel. You can also permanently display asset names by selecting Show as List from Panel Preferences. Now these two assets contribute to my client's branding rather than just the header for the website. So I'm going to move them to another subcategory to keep my assets organised. From Panel Preferences, select Create Subcategory and then rename it as we did before. If you want to drag assets around and between subcategories, you need to use the Option key on a Mac or Alt key on Windows while dragging. You can reorder subcategories by using their Options menu. Select either Move Up or Move Down. One thing to note about adding symbols to the Assets panel is that every time you add a symbol to the panel, it is classified as a unique symbol and is not linked to the others. We'll discuss this in a little more detail later on in the video. If you create an asset in error, you can delete it by Control-clicking on a Mac or right-clicking on Windows on the asset and selecting Delete Asset. If you want to share a populated asset category with another machine with Affinity Designer, you will need to export the category from Panel Preferences. It will be exported as an AF Assets file. If you want to remove a subcategory, you can do this from the Option menu. And if you want to delete an entire category, this is done via Panel Preferences. If you want to import assets from another machine, use this option from Panel Preferences. So now you know how to build up the content in the Assets panel, let's explore how to use them in your designs. For standard objects, it's simply a case of dragging them from the panel onto the page or artboard. However, for symbols and objects which conform to constraints, there are a few things to consider. Let's start with a new document and create an artboard from the outset. As you can see, the Assets panel remains populated because its content is accessible from any open document. In another video, I added anchoring to the header. If I simply drag this onto the artboard, the constraints on the object are set to the default. If I hold the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on Windows and then drag the asset onto the page, Designer will activate the constraints applied when it was made into an asset. In this case, anchoring it to the left, right and top of the artboard. If an asset was made from or contained a symbol, that symbol will be added to the Symbols panel as soon as the asset is placed on the artboard. The logo was originally created as a symbol in another video, so if we drag the logo onto the artboard and then display the Symbols panel, you can see it is added here. Any additional logos we add to the artboard are linked to this symbol. You can see they're linked because if I change one instance, the other instance is changed too. However, now I've changed this symbol, if I drag another instance from the Assets panel, it is added to the document as a new symbol, which is not linked to the other instances, but is linked to any additional assets you drag on the page which contain that symbol. So, changes made to symbols on the page are updated here on the Symbols panel, but are not updated here on the Assets panel. As I mentioned before, every instance of a symbol in the Assets panel is classified as a unique symbol. So if I now drag this logo onto the artboard, you'll see it has been added as a new symbol in this document. The final thing for me to add before I sign off is that you can embed the current asset category in the current document using Panel Preferences on the Assets panel. Just click Embed in Current Document to activate this option. With this option on, your document can be saved, shared, and opened with another machine with Affinity Designer installed, and the assets will be available along with that document without having to export and import an asset category as described earlier. I've covered a lot here, and hopefully you've seen how easy it is to work with assets in Affinity Designer. I've also briefly touched on constraints and symbols, two other 1.5 features, which you might want to find out more about in our other video tutorials. And of course, if you're keen to learn more about all the features in the app, check out our comprehensive help system, available from the Help menu. Thanks for watching.